Hi, and welcome to the opening session of this McKnight's Workforce Development Forum. You're tuned in to uncover the equation for an exceptional employee experience. I'm McKnight's Executive Editor, Jim Berklin, and I'm your moderator. Everybody, it seems, could use some assistance developing tactical approaches to create unique and effective employee experiences for each stage of the employee life cycle. And you've come to the right place for that today. This webinar will discuss true staff motivations and managerial misalignment. It also will delve into things like master training essentials and talk about how to sidestep some common pitfalls. I'll be introducing our speakers in a moment, but first we have some housekeeping matters to take care of. Today's presentation will be in video format. There is a nice handout to print out in order to follow along with some of the discussion and some of the figures talked about. If you'd like to do that, just go to the downloads bubble on your screen and print it out to follow along. If you're having audio problems, please first check the volume control on your machine. This is the most common cause of these problems. You also have a help button to use if your own troubleshooting doesn't work. Also, we will have time for a Q&A session near the end of the presentation. If you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to tap them out and submit them directly to us, starting now, in fact. Those we don't get to in real time will be answered afterward. Now, regarding continuing education, this educational offering has been reviewed by the National Continuing Education Review Service of the National Association of Long-Term Care Administrator Boards. It has been approved for 1 clock hour, but you need to stay tuned into this event for its entirety during the original broadcast in order to receive a certificate. You can track CE requirements through the course completion tracker, which is accessed through the last icon in the area below the open webinar panel. Once you've achieved 50 viewing minutes, a View Certificate button will display, and the required viewing duration will show a green checkbox. You can then view or save your certificate. A copy will also be emailed to you afterward. We'd like to note that this program is made possible by support from CARE. Please visit the fine folks there at www.doyoucare.com. Finally, this session will be archived and available on demand shortly after this live broadcast. You can access it again, or others can experience it for the first time by simply going to the registration page to enter this studio. The URL is mcknights.com/021324 Workforce Development Forum. Not to worry, we'll show you that on the screen later too. Now, I'd like you to meet our presenters. Allison Gilgenbach is the Director of Training at CARE, leading the charge in onboarding and training every new member of the CARE team. James Lee is the CEO and co-founder of Bella Groves, which includes a care education company developing dementia training for family caregivers, a coaching service to guide families, and a 32-bed dementia care residence that serves as the hub of learning and modeling care. Laura Williams is Director of Care at Bella Groves and owner of Williams Career School of Excellence, which conducts CNA training. And Katie Roan is the Senior Vice President of HERO and Employee Experience for CARE. Well, I know you have a full slate of topics to jump into, Katie, so if you're ready, why don't you take it away?
Thank you so much, Jim. James, Laura, Allison, thank you so much for being here today. This feels a bit like my Super Bowl topic, near and dear to my heart, and having you all as guests is we're in for a really great conversation here today. We could probably talk for most of the day as we have before in the past, but we only have 45 minutes. So I want to set the stage for our conversation where instead of jumping into, okay, how do we build out the tactical pieces around building an exceptional employee experience? How do we recruit? How do we retain? How do we lower turnover within the industry? One of the questions that we always ask ourselves here at CARE is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? So what I'd really like to do is to get each one of your thoughts as you think about the status quo around the senior living industry. Why is it so important when thinking about the state of the industry today, why it's important to have an exceptional employee experience moving forward?
Yeah, I love that. If I may, I'll jump in on that. I like starting from this place of defining the status quo if we're going to actually change it. And I think that our industry has, you know, a lot of times they'll say things like we have a workforce problem, a very generic statement about employees, and particular what they're talking about are caregivers in senior living, and then maybe some of the frontline manager roles. But I often say we don't have a workforce problem, we have a leadership problem. We have a system, we have a structure that looks at caregivers as just employees of the business rather than they are the resource. We're harnessing a human resource, which is people's capacity to care for others. And so we don't need to fix a workforce problem. We need to fix how senior living companies are structured to think about their employees. And for us, we really think about optimizing the caregiver experience. Do they feel really good about caring for seniors? Do they feel really informed about dementia? Do they have supplies to get their work done? And so it's really about optimizing the caregiver's experience, and everything good has flown from that.
If I may, I'll jump in also and kind of define what I would call the status quo in regards to the perception of those caregivers. I think it's important to kind of check our biases, when we're doing interviews and we're assessing for that person to be able to provide care in that capacity, and that at many times, because we perceive them as a subordinate and not as a partner that is providing support to the seniors in the facility, then we already start off on a bad foot, right? Without even having a conversation. We already have a wrong perception about that individual. And I love this term that we're using now, professional caregivers. It elevates the role. It elevates the perception of that individual, because as we know, a lot of caregivers have done this for years, and we see quite a bit of them in our school. But I think it also starts with just checking our biases and checking our perception of that role.
I also like, James, what you said about optimizing that experience. I also sat as an executive director, as a regional director previously before my role at CARE as well. And I do feel like the experience was, it's always been more or less of a checkbox. And I'll probably reference this a few times in this webinar. But it's like, okay, who's actually involved with that? It's not actually, only HR. It's not only somebody within training, but how does that entire experience, how do you become innovative? How do you become proactive around all of that? How you're appreciating, recognizing your team. There's many things that go into this. How do you stay competitive with compensation? And then overall, like, how are you investing in your employees, and what are you doing to ensure that continuous improvement?
And I think, James, one of the things that you said earlier is about how do we change leadership? How do we change our systems? And I'd love to get each one of your thoughts on, in your experiences, where have you seen managerial misalignment? We're thinking of, okay, this is my staff's true motivations, but really my perceptions and my thoughts around it doesn't actually align with motivations of our frontline staff. And I'd love if you guys have had examples or what you have seen in your previous experiences around that misalignment.
Laura, do you want to lead off on this one?
Sure, I can. I think one of the thoughts that came to mind is something that James and I did when we worked together previously, is that we actually assessed and really got to know who are our frontline workers. Like, what are their roles? Where do they come from? What are their struggles? It really taught me something, in that we assume that everyone has the same motivation when they walk into the door. But honestly, seeing them in their full just their full role outside of the job also gives us perspective of why they're there. They may be the person that is taking care of everyone in their family. And a lot of times these are the individuals that are picking up the most shifts. So we have to be responsible in seeing that and be able to give barriers and also remind them and force them to take vacation time, right? So I think it's important for us to not just assume that everyone just needs a job or why they're there, but also recognize that we need to know who they are as individuals.
Yeah. Laura and I did have the opportunity to work together, which was really fun. And I learned a ton from Laura, actually. I was the executive director. Laura was our health and wellness director. And I really, really felt like we were partners more than we were like boss and subordinate. It's something that Laura said just a few minutes ago. When you look at members of your team as partners and not as a hierarchy, you start from a better place. I think some of the misalignment that happens in senior living is that the people making decisions about the workforce inside of their companies rarely, if ever, actually work alongside caregivers. And so they don't experience what it's like to, they look at reports of how efficient is that caregiver with these tasks. We did these studies and it shows that, a shower should only take 20 minutes. Well, go to that community and provide that shower assistance and see how long it takes you. Right. So at our community, at our company, Bella Groves, managers regularly work care shifts. And the reason for that is not to micromanage, it's to feel what they feel. And it's to experience what they experience. I remember one time working an overnight shift at Bella Groves thinking, oh my God, I got to walk all the way over to the other building to go get the cleaning supplies to come back and clean. That's really inefficient. And when I talked to the caregivers about it the next day, they were like, thank you. Like us coming to them and saying, are you experiencing the same problem? You would have thought I gave everybody $1,000 bonus. They felt seen, they felt heard, and more so, not even that we responded to their needs, but we took the interest to experience what they were experiencing. So I think a lot of the bias that Laura mentioned, I think a lot of the misalignment happens because people making decisions about their workforce do not actually experience what it's like to be part of that workforce.
I totally agree with both of you. Also, I think, you have to have that base of a mutual trust within your organization, trust within your employees, the team members have to feel that as well too. Mm-hmm. And I know that, that's what you're referring to when they're working those shifts as well. It's definitely empowering when you are able to have that mutual trust. It's motivating, it promotes creativity, collaboration with everybody. I know, a few examples even of mutual trust. You think about the Ritz-Carlton. I do believe without approval, they're able to respond to certain customer service situations up to a certain amount. I mean, that's trust, that's collaboration. An example that I can give from the past as well too, again, be working alongside my caregivers, my nurses as well. We had an email inbox, and if you had a suggestion, a question, anything that you thought could improve how we worked within our community, you can just email the stupid stuff we do at yourorganization.com. Okay. And employees could send those ideas, how do they think we can actually streamline something? Or would it be better to have this cart in this hallway versus this, where it is now? Some of those tiny things to get the feedback from the employees really give them a sense of owning and ownership and owning that community and involvement. And it really improves their day-to-day as well too.
Totally.
And so, and as we think about trying to then, okay, like if we're going to create this environment, this experience, when we think about then being able to recruit individuals then into our organization, like James, for example, like I would love to know, like Bella Groves, like what does your recruitment strategy look like? What types of unique methods are you using and be able to attract individuals into your organization?
Yeah. And again, Laura and I had a lot of these experiences. The origin, the genesis of all of these actually came when Laura and I worked together. One thing I'll start off with in this specific topic is that I believe that our industry has done a really poor job of training applicants on how to behave during the interview and application process. And so I'll give you a practical example. We have someone on our team who's responsible for setting up interviews and doing some screening, et cetera, et cetera. And she was telling me the other day, oh my gosh, I'm getting ghosted all of the time. I don't know what's going on. And, even people we make offers to, I won't hear from them. James, what's going on? Why are people like this? I was like, hold up, let's think about what's happening here. And we walk through what is their job application process like at the other 9 places that they're putting in applications. And we as an industry are training them that we need somebody who's quickly available. What wages are you looking for? Do you have any criminal record? Okay, no, you can start working with us. Our industry has a very transactional way of behaving in the interview process. So why would we expect them to behave any differently for us because we think so highly of ourselves? And so as a team, we stopped and thought about, okay, this is their common experience. So how do we disrupt that common experience? And so we have really adopted a sales and marketing outlook for if we're going to attract people that fit into the culture and what we're doing here, we have to talk about and we have to treat them the same way that we would if we were treating a sales prospect, somebody who was going to move in. Mm-hmm. So even the messages you put on your website about apply here for a job, well, that's not very enticing. I think on our website it says we'll put you first, you put the residents first. Deal? The call to action to submit the application should tell you a little bit about how we feel about employees that is different from how the other places are going to feel about you. And that's a sales and marketing strategy, not a retention or recruiting strategy necessarily, but I think it works.
And
Laura's smiling the whole time because she's like, oh yeah, we're doing that.
And Laura, I think you bring a really interesting perspective because you are recruiting future CNAs to your school, and then you get to see those individuals be recruited by organizations. So tell me what you have seen, what works well and what doesn't work well when thinking about recruiting frontline staff.
Definitely. Thank you. It is a different perspective to be in it from this aspect of things. One of the things that we have, though, to just set a foundation as an organization, my husband and I don't refer our students or put them in front of employers that have a reputation that their environment is not going to make them feel safe. So we already have a standard that we put in place. So I think that's important to know. Now, that doesn't mean every school does. I honestly think nobody has ever thought about it. But because of my experience and how that can add to the trauma and their perception and false perceptions of the industry, we just have a very high standard. So we do ask and check in with our graduates on how things are going. Now, we also understand that people will complain, right? So I've been in it enough to know that, okay, this is a part of the territory in working in healthcare, but there's also those extreme situations where people feel unsafe and they didn't last very long. And if I hear that consistently, we will not put that employer in front of our graduates. I just wanted to just put that out there. How honestly, the red carpet is rolled out. That's what I noticed. These are usually the employers that we actually have clinical contracts on board. So we, again, are very selective on where our graduates go, even for the clinical experience. We really want them to see the best of our healthcare industry. So that means the first day, one of our employers, they have a party, they are giving them a tour. They're talking about the residents. They're not even offering them a job yet. They're just saying, this is who we are. This is how long we've been in this industry. This is how long we've been at this employer. So I think James already hit on it. The red carpet is pulled out just like we would for a resident when we are saying, hey, choose us, choose here for your loved one to be in senior living. We're actually asking the CNA to choose that facility based on that experience.
Mhm. And I think one of the things that, particularly now, every CNA frontline staff, they have so many choices. Like they have so many choices of where potentially they want to go work because everyone's looking, everyone's recruiting, right? And so when I think about, I said my background has been in recruiting for talent acquisition for almost 20 years, from being outside of the industry to then coming to the industry before coming to care. I think one of the things that has kind of really surprised me is thinking about and really tapping into what we've talked about earlier is what's the motivation of why someone would want to join your organization. When we are recruiting care heroes, again, we're recruiting individuals to work on our platform. We have over 50,000 heroes right now, but we're really tapping into the persona and the flexibility and being able to earn their own earn extra money, because again, most of the individuals on our platform, 75% of them, they're full-time employed somewhere else. We're filling a gap or a need for them around that flexibility. So when we are recruiting, and again, we're in many states across the country, we're really tapping into that messaging around being able to have that flexibility and being able to really set your own schedule. And we've done research studies nationally, states, cities, and that always comes back to a true motivation. So I think taking that motivation and then putting that into not only your sales and marketing, like you've talked about, James, but then also a part of your entire interview process and your selection process is really important. Mm-hmm. So as we think about the employee experience, we're kind of getting into the recruiting. Let's talk about onboarding. Okay, so you have someone, you've hired them. Now what happens? You've got 90 days to make an impact. How do you do that?
90 days. I'm curious also where your 90 days comes from. So I'll give you a second to think about that. And the reason I'm curious about it is because we look at it in terms of 90 days as well. And maybe it's because our industry kind of considers that if the highest turnover happens within the 90-day window.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a 13-week onboarding process at Bella Groves. 13 weeks is about 90 days. And so we took a well-known statistic in our industry, like 90 days, that's your make or break of whether or not you're going to keep somebody. But it's not just about retention. We have 90 days as an organization for them to fall in love with us, for them to fall in love with the way that we do things. And so the 13 weeks is a progressive learning schedule based around dementia knowledge. And so the premise of all of that for us is that caregivers want to be better caregivers. They wouldn't be in this industry otherwise. And so everybody else is maybe talking about extrinsic or intrinsic, or how much should we pay? Should we do a bonus? All of that is secondary to, will caregivers feel like they themselves are leveling up their skills as a result of working with your organization? So caregivers at Bella Groves repeatedly tell us, I am learning so much about dementia, and then they correlate that to a story with a resident. And that's not by accident. We design our learning in a way that we ground it in very practical stuff. So as an example, they have a capstone project at the end of their 90 days where they have to present to managers, tell us something that you really were impacted by during this entire training process, and give us some relevant examples with a specific resident. So they end up doing a little bit of story research on the resident. They even interview family members and say, hey, I'm doing this capstone project at work and I picked your mom and I'd love to know a little bit about her history. So everybody's really, really engaged in this. And then they get to share all of the things that they're doing that they're very proud of. So in the orientation process, we're not just thinking about, can we retain this person? We have 90 days to show them all of our good stuff in terms of training, and then help them feel really, really great about what they've learned and applied. And no surprise, we are retaining them as a result of that. So last thing I'll say is that retention is an outcome. It is not an input. right? We can't fix retention. We can fix the things that lead to retention. And I think that's a big missing thought process in our mindset.
I was going to say.
All right, I'll jump in here.
Yes, I'm turning to you.
Somebody give feedback. I was like, I'm gonna mute myself. Laura's like, where's my unmute button?
One of the things that we did differently when James and I worked together is we made sure that each of those individuals spent time with the key leaders. So we didn't just put them on the floor 3 days. That's, pretty much the status quo, if that, right? So for over a set of weeks, they had to spend time with each key director, get to know them, understand expectations, and ask questions, right? So I think that's important, where we're not, I think the status quo is just to throw them in and watch them swim. So I think that's also important, because one of the quotes that I read as I was preparing for this is, culture is defined by the worst behavior tolerated. Right? So within a week, 7 to 10, 14 days, they're going to see the worst behavior in the staff, in the person that you may have matched them with. It's also, I think, the status quo to also match that individual with someone who we think is strong, but they're not the best people person. So they're leaving them behind. They're not explaining anything. I think we have to do a better job of thinking through, who are we matching them with? This might be the person that has sorority. They've been there for years, but they take their time. They may take a little bit longer with the resident. But the caregiver, the new associate, now feels taken care of. They feel like things are understood. So I think, number one, our downfall is this 3-day watch them swim versus let's actually bring them on a journey like we do our residents, right? We bring our residents, we escort them to the dining room. We're making sure that they understand what activities are involved. How are they being introduced and reintroduced to us over that span of time?
So good.
James, I have a quick question, actually, so I can understand this too. So, even from the recruitment process to the actual experience, are you describing the culture, or do you sort of let it speak for itself there? I mean, how do you describe that along the way to get that buy-in too?
I love the question. The central, and this isn't a gimmick, it's just a thing that we do to show our interest in them. So in the interview process, again, 9 out of 10 interviews that caregivers go to, the questions are going to feel exactly the same. Why do you love working with seniors? What shift would you like to work? And then it very quickly gets very practical, and it becomes very clear to the applicant, okay, they just need somebody to fill an empty shift here. So one of the questions that we ask early on in the interview process is, hey, tell me a little bit about something that frustrates you about our industry. And then just pause. And then they're like, oh my God, is this a trick? And then you see, okay, as we lean in and I'm smiling, I'm like, no, I really want to know. Tell me something that frustrates you about the industry. What would you like to see fixed? And when they realize that it's a genuine question, then they give us real answers. And again, thinking about this as a sales and marketing process and not just an interview process. Okay, so one of the things you're frustrated by is that you're never able to really fully take time off. And you feel like if you don't pick up those overtime shifts, then the residents are going to go without. Man, I totally get what you're saying. And then we relate to that. And then we say, this is how we're fixing that problem at Bella Groves. Other people have said that in the interview process. I gotta connect you with Michelle. She said that, and she's found her experience here to be so much different. These are all simple things that we do in the sales and marketing process. Why are we not doing that in the hiring process? Right. So it's not a magic questionnaire that we have. It is a mindset that we have, that we are actually serving this caregiver, and that if we can understand what their root needs are, then we can match those problems with solutions that our workforce, our situation at Bella Groves could potentially fix for them.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I am hearing is that, especially when bringing on and a part of that experience from an onboarding perspective, whether it's 13 weeks or beyond, is that it really has to be owned by everybody, right? It really has to be owned by every single person, right, within the community. But how do you build that ownership?
Laura?
Oh, this is so good. It starts before they even enter the room. You can't create something that hasn't been established prior to them walking in. James and I kind of piggyback off each other, but we've spent a lot of time in the back office talking and developing that cohesive team and understanding our mutual value and what is important to us, what is important to the seniors that we're taking care of. So it's not something that you can do in a quick stand up and say, hey, today we got a new caregiver, let's put on our best show, right? You really need to do the work and define that together. And therefore it will be felt in that community as people enter into it.
What I'd like to do, again, if we're going around the kind of our continuum here, so moving into that onboarding, getting into that training and development. Now, this is either a question for Allison or for Laura. I'm not sure who wants to take this first, but what is your philosophy on training frontline staff within a community?
I can talk first if that's okay. I was actually taught, I had an amazing mentor probably about 15 years ago, and she had said something to me that stuck with me, even though things have changed tremendously within the past 10 years. I've brought this with me to CARE. I've brought this with me to other organizations. And I feel like with a training and onboarding program, you really do need to have, you have to have a clear goal and a clear measure from the beginning, right? So what do you measure? What are you setting forth? And she had recommended looking at the 4 C's. So if there's one thing to take away from me from this webinar, would be the 4 C's. It's compliance, clarification, culture, and connection. Those are the 4 things you need to look at in a training and onboarding program, because I feel like everything can be brought into those buckets, right? You have regulations, you have policies, you have some of the things that you need to learn right along the way, the things that keep you going, and the measurements that we have to comply with as well too. But we do need to also clarify those throughout the way. How are those linked to the measurements? How are those linked to what we're doing? And then within culture and connection, the last 2 C's, how do you educate? How do you describe your culture? And how are you talking about it right from the beginning? Just as Laura said, it's not just walking into your stand-up meeting. Hey, we have a new caregiver starting in memory care today. Her name is Miranda. Say hi, when you get a chance. What is that? Not to say I haven't done that before. I have, unfortunately, many years ago, right? I think we all have. But how are you really setting that tone, the expectations prior to that? Even during the, any email communication you're having with this person before they start, any phone conversations you're having, are you able to send them something kind of cool from your organization too before they start? I think one of the worst experiences I had, I walked into a new community and they spelled my name wrong on my name tag as an executive director. And I thought, wow, okay, well, welcome aboard, right? I mean, some of those little things, the culture, that goes into the culture, the connection. And then connection, I also think you have to have a way to develop those workplace relationships. I love that you said, the connection with a mentorship type of program. How are they meeting, different types of managers there, the different staff there as well along the way too. So again, from my standpoint, I look at it as, kind of 4 buckets to kind of go through with an onboarding and training program, just to make sure they're getting that relevant experience along the way.
Definitely. I agree with all of that. It's so good. So one of the things that I did actually in my interview process with James is he asked me, how do I train people? What is my philosophy? And I had to come up with this. I say come up with it, like really put it down to a science of How do I approach training individuals? And I have used this prior to our interview, but he just allowed me to hone that in and implement that as we work together. So the first thing is core. And I define core as really understanding who I am as the supervisor, and also understanding who the individual is that is sitting in front of me that I'm needing to train and retain in my team. And that's beyond just the name tag. That's beyond, hey, can you take care of this? This is, I want to really know who you are. And I'm not asking in basic conversation. This actually happens over time with time spent with that employee. The second concept is investment. I'm going to invest. I'm committed to investing in the development of this individual from the time they walk in the door to the time that they decide to transition to a better opportunity. Perception. I'm going to acknowledge that at times, because of how long I've been in this industry, I've been in the industry since I was 16. I started off as a CNA. I have biases that may show up at certain times because of something that that employee did. But I have to acknowledge that bias and I have to put it aside, and I have to lead with questions and not assumptions when I'm trying to understand what happened, what went wrong, and how we can improve that process. And lastly, results. Out of those three concepts, the results of a person who is fulfilled in their role in my company, the results of that person feel satisfied with what they're doing and also feel like they're seen, heard, and understood. So those are the things that I use even now as a school owner in my process.
James, anything you want to add?
I was wondering if I can answer every question. I don't want to answer every question, but I feel really passionate about all of them. Okay, so training and development. I think that this is one of the things that is completely overlooked, particularly in operations by operations leader. You need a learning and development professional on your team. If you do not have a learning and development professional on your team somewhere helping to drive the onboarding and learning experience, you are completely missing out, and you are making a lot of assumptions about how people learn. So here's a practical example of that. We all, as an industry, look for people who are coachable. Yes? Yeah, that's like a primary thing people talk about. Oh, was that candidate coachable? Was that candidate coachable? It presumes that you are an excellent coach. Right? The question presumes that you are probably the best instructor that they will ever have. So one of the things that we think about in terms of fit in the interview process is we assess what is their learning style. How do they like to learn? And we ask questions that really get at understanding how this person prefers to learn. And then we have to have a very honest look at how do we teach. What is my teaching style? What are the things that I'm good at? But also, what are my limitations? I know that I am quite verbose. I use a lot of metaphors. I like to dig into stuff and just like go into the weeds on a single topic. If somebody doesn't like learning that way, we are not going to be a good fit together, right? So it's not just about are they coachable? It's are we increasing and honing our own coaching skills. So I think training and development has to take into consideration the people who are facilitating the training and development. I don't know why I emphasized facilitating that way. It was the wrong cadence. So here's my one thing, the one thing for people to take away. I would write down Bloom's taxonomy. So that is a learning and development term, Bloom's taxonomy. And if you want like extra bonus points, Google Bloom's taxonomy action verbs. And to me, this is like the Maslow's hierarchy of learning. So you've got a base level, and each level you grow from there. So the very, very first level is remember. The second level is understand. And the third is apply. There are three other levels, but for our intents purposes, we look at the first three. Can you remember the stuff we need you to remember? And the action verbs help you to determine that. Can you define it? Can you find it? Can you find this policy and procedure at Bella Groves? That's remember and level one. The second level is understand. So we're going to have different action verbs. Can you describe the methodology? Can you compare and contrast the Bella Groves approach to sundowning versus maybe how you've been taught before? So you need a higher level competency. And then the third is apply. I need you to show me that you learned this. So we're not going to talk about it. I'm going to shadow you on the floor, and you get to demonstrate the skills and things that you've learned. So if your training and development process doesn't go deep into the weeds of learning and adult learning, then you are making a lot of assumptions about how training and development is going in your organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think I think throughout our conversation, we've talked a lot about what a really healthy, robust kind of employee experience looks like. And one of the things is how do you retain individuals within your organization? I'm going to throw a bit of I don't say a wrench, but a question is also, not only can we think about and talk about how do we retain, but let's also talk about burnout as well. This is something that this industry, it is a extremely hot topic right now, and they go hand in hand together. Have there been strategies within your own organizations or that you've seen organizations that have helped to either mitigate or has been very purposeful or intentional to avoid or prevent burnout?
There's a lot I could say here. I'll do two kind of quick bullet points. One is that from the foundation of our company, we set a staffing ratio of 1 caregiver to every 4 residents. I will caveat that by saying we're a 32-bed community, so we're a smaller model, and so larger facilities will have different staffing patterns. But 1 caregiver to 4 residents. We at the outset of creating our company, we said that we were going to create work that is manageable for our care team. Now, we had to make some decisions around the rest of the formation of our organization to be able to fund that. There are things that managers do that are kind of, a Venn diagram. We kind of cross each other a little bit. Laura, who was a health and wellness director for one of our former organizations, well, she works with us as a consulting director of care. So we could have a nurse full-time on staff at Bella Groves, or we could have a higher staffing ratio and then outsource the things that we actually need nursing expertise for. So Laura works with us in that capacity. The burnout is high in our industry because the way that our companies are formed are not conducive to helping people not feel burnout. If your regular job in the memory care facility is to take care of 14, 15 residents, no amount of mental health days or PTO or attaboys are going to help you with burnout. You're going to feel like you just aren't doing enough. And I think burnout isn't just physical exhaustion. It's your emotional exhaustion of, I don't feel like I'm making a difference. And so I think companies have to take a really hard look at how are you structuring your organization, because whatever burnout mitigation policy you have after the fact, it doesn't matter if your organizations aren't structured to prevent it in the first place.
All right. Laura, is there anything else you wanted to add to that before I think we move on? We have a bunch of questions here that have been coming in.
Nice.
That was very good, actually. The only thing that I can add to the addition is that, when there's an associate that is taking most of the shifts, a lot of time they're picking up that overtime, they're going to be your hardest worker, is to really honestly think through putting boundaries in place for that individual, because they're the ones that are ultimately, I would notice the pattern, they would get sick. Right. And then they are out for days because they've overworked themselves. So I think I really don't want to add anything because what James said is just right on point. But that's another thought to think of. We usually just keep asking that individual. But I would notice very soon after this individual would get sick, we would ultimately have to fill that shift either way. So just rethink those picking up shifts, enforce that they have to take those breaks and they have to enjoy their time off. I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I know we could keep on going here, but we have a bunch of questions. Jim, are you able to join us?
Indeed, I am right here, guys. Fantastic points. You have so many things, and I'm so glad that we have the questions in. that we can put in front of our panel. So if I give you guys just a breather there, let me start to cue these up here. And I think, Laura, we're going to go to you first with one. It says, from a state perspective, how can we ensure that our providers are creating a safe and inclusive space for hiring prospectives?
So I'm not sure what they mean from a state perspective, so that I'll just kind of, skip over that just for a moment. I would need a more clarity on that.
Sure.
But when I think about safety, you want to also be able to go beyond just an open door policy, right? You need to understand what's happening in the environment, not only inside of your facility, but outside. Because if we only just think through the person is a caregiver, this is where you need to be. The old age tale is, leave what's outside, and focus on what's inside. It's really false. I don't think any of us in the room does that, right? So it's important to be able to know and look your associates in the eye and be able to pull them aside and say, hey, how are you doing? And that's something I made a point to do. I would walk around, look, and it never failed that something was going on, but it's because I was being very intentional to know the normal behavior of my associate, just like I would a resident, and also know when something is off, and giving them an opportunity to come talk to me if they don't want to do that, to give them a break and to give them an opportunity. But safety also has to do with emotional safety, being heard, right? Even when we don't feel like it's important to us at the moment, it's important to that associate. So it's not just about physical breaks, but it's also about being emotionally and mentally heard when there's something coming up. So I hope that helps and brings a little bit of clarity.
Excellent. Outstanding. Now, James, we've got one for you from Nate. He writes in, feelings of esteem and belonging are critical to people leveling up. How do you build these components in the hierarchy of needs?
That is a deep level question, Nate. That masterclass level question. I would say that esteem. When you think about esteem, it's a feeling that your contributions matter, that you have worthiness. Esteem is about more than clout. Esteem is about my thoughts and opinions belong here. And so one of the things that we are very, very intentional about at Bella Groves is that when our care team, especially when they present an idea or they execute an idea, we make a really big deal about it. Internally in our communication tool, we post about it on social media. We specifically tag that caregiver and the person that came up with that idea. So we just had a Super Bowl party, and I had no idea it was happening. So if you go on our Facebook or LinkedIn, you will see photos of our Super Bowl party. I had no idea it was happening. The executive director had no idea it was happening. A caregiver knew she was on the schedule for Super Bowl Sunday. So she went on Amazon and bought T-shirts for the residents, all red, because both teams were red. And she bought uniforms, like referees for her and her partners on the shift. And she got everybody on our team to join in. And it was so amazing. I was watching the Super Bowl and I'm seeing these photos and things come through our messaging app. And my first instinct is to go give credit to one of the managers. Hey, this was a great idea. But they were very quick to point out to me, actually, that was Michelle. And so not only, of course, we reimbursed her for all of those expenses, but beyond that, we made a big deal internally and externally about what she did. Now, do you think Michelle feels a sense of esteem and belonging at Bella Groves? 100%.
That's outstanding. And hopefully she didn't point out the game went into overtime. So then no, just kidding about that.
Yeah, they didn't bill us for overtime stuff, but
there you go. You got a bargain. You really have something working well there. Allison, wanted to come back to you. Donna asks again, what are the 4 C's again?
Sure. Compliance, clarification, culture, and connection. So again, just with compliance, identifying those regulations, clarifying and setting those expectations, creating what and describing what you want the culture to look like, not just in your stand-up meetings, and everything around the employee onboarding process. And then that connection piece, an example of the connection piece would be within a mentorship program, or how are you going to develop those workplace relationships with the managers and peers?
Excellent, excellent. Now, Katie, I think Nate brings up a good case of not just taking things too much for granted here. He asks, are words of affirmation attaboys?
I don't think words of affirmations can just be attaboys. When I get the opportunity to meet with our heroes across the country, whether it's in Lincoln, Nebraska or Atlanta, Georgia, ultimately, I believe that each one of them, when having conversations, those words of affirmations that really resonate with them is listening to their ideas, that they are a valued partner, care partner, right, in the community. There's many of them that said, I've never been to a party just for me before, or been celebrated before. So I think it's going beyond just, hey, you did a great job, but actually taking their ideas and implementing them in multiple ways and making them a partner within your organization.
Okay, excellent. Allison, this one's to you. Christian writes, and what's an example of an outdated view of retention or recruitment? And do you have any examples of ideas that could replace outdated views?
I think looking at something as outdated, the first thing that comes to my head would be a sign-on bonus, right? We're just looking at, okay, how can we keep people here? That's probably one of the first things that comes to my head with that question. So maybe looking at more of a longevity retention type of strategy around that, creating, again, not just the checkbox, okay, I'm going to fix, people will not leave, so I will give them a sign-on bonus, and then they are stuck with us for a certain amount of time. Another example of something that would be to foster a better employee experience would be really showing and developing that strong career pathway, similar to what the food service industry did, especially during the pandemic. They really showed us how somebody within 5 years could come in as a caregiver and maybe end up a director of nursing. What are we doing along that way within those 5 years as well too? And then again, from a retention standpoint, looking at your true benefits, not just the benefits that are handed over on a piece of paper on day one, right? Here's your 401k program. A lot of times, many of our frontline workers are more concerned about how they will pay their monthly bills rather than saving for a 401k. So you might want to look at a real life benefit, again, looking into some sort of early wage access program. That's another example of something that might be a little more with the times right now.
All right, very good. We've got a couple more. We'll try to get through as many as we can. James, this is to you. Jackie writes in, what are successful providers doing to manage the employee experience? In other words, who holds ownership of that within an organization?
I think the highest operations leader ultimately owns it. If you're getting a report that has employee retention or expense, or if you see a report that has your employees represented in it, you own it. And it is your responsibility that everybody below you owns it. So that's as quick as I can answer that. There's a lot to unpack beneath that, but I think, yeah.
I think that's excellent direction. Now, I'm going to go back to you first, and then Laura, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Natalie asks, do you think the industry is trending in the right direction in terms of creating more positive employee experiences? James, why don't you take it first?
Yeah. Maybe this, I don't know how this is going to come across. I don't see the evidence yet that we are headed in the right direction. I see individual cases. I see organizations, mom and pop shops, small regional operators. I think that small players like ours, Bella Groves, has a real opportunity to create influence in our industry by talking about the things we talk about, and by doing the things that we do, and then having a platform like this, McKnight's and Care, inviting Laura and me to come talk about this. I mean, we wouldn't be able to share these without platforms like this. So I think the industry has bright spots, but I don't see the evidence yet that as an industry we're headed in the right direction.
All right, Laura, what do you think? Does he have it right there?
He has it right. I don't even want to add any more to that. Yeah, I agree. We still got some room to improve.
Well, yeah. You need to show ambition. There's no question. That's great. Okay, so now we come to the final and hardest question, as I told our panelists earlier, that we're going to go to. We've talked and heard so many great points, so many points of emphasis. If there's one thing that each of you have to have listeners take away from, and the viewers from this presentation, what would it be? Let me give you each about 30 seconds to put that out there. James, I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, I'll end where I started. We do not have a workforce problem. We have a leadership problem. And if you can correctly define the problem, then you can have a shot at getting to the right answer.
Outstanding. Laura, what's the one thing?
I believe that one of the best quotes I said today was that culture is defined by the worst behavior tolerated. And that's in your caregiving staff and most importantly in the leadership. So I think it's worth taking the time to define culture and know what that really looks like.
Great. Katie, what do you think?
I'm excited that we're having this conversation. I hope that we will continue, that employee experience will continue to be, and even more so, a topic within the senior living industry, because I believe it is vitally important to the future of the industry and retaining individuals.
Definitely a people question, isn't it? And Allison, what's the one thing?
Remembering that the employee experience is not only for your HR or training team, it's bigger than just a checkbox on your orientation form, and it will be the core driver of growth within your organization.
Outstanding. Well, there you have it, folks. This is why we hold these panels. We have experts such as these, really great information. I hope you've enjoyed today's webcast as much as I have. This session will be available shortly at McKnight's.com/021324. That's our date there. Workforce Development Forum. So we'd like to give our special thanks to James Lee, Laura Williams, Allison Gilligenbach, and Katie Roan once again for some excellent thoughts really on building outstanding employee experiences. And we'd like to thank our session sponsor, CARE. Check it out at doyoucare, with the K, doyoucare.com. And we want to thank you, our many listeners. You've been a big part of the success today with excellent questions. Right now, get ready for the second session in today's McKnight's Workforce Development Forum. That'll start at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's just about a half hour from now. The title is Empowering Staff Engagement and Flexibility to Prevent Turnover. You won't want to miss it. Once again, thank you for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you again at all future McKnight's events and webinars. This is Jim Berkland for McKnight's, wishing you good health and outstanding days ahead.